5 minutes, so that you understand exactly what menopause is, what you can expect, how different people experience it, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about HRT as well, and that's at the end. And then I'm going to pass over to Fabiane, who's going to talk more from a kind of lifestyle, kind of personal, human, I guess.
Try.
If at any point I've said something that's not clear, just please pick me up on it. I really don't mind at all. Or if you disagree with something, then please pick me up on that. At the end, we will do lots of questions and answers. I know some of you have already submitted questions, and I hope that between us we'll cover most of them. But like I say, this is a very free and safe space, so please do feel free to butt in. Okay? All right. I don't know. Can you see the screen at the back?
No.
I don't really know how to make it smaller without like breaking the screen. So okay. Okay. So honestly, I've been teaching menopause probably for about 15, 20 years now, and for a long time there was no one was really very interested in it. But, and I don't know if you recognise Davina McCall, who is a celebrity, who she was around about the age of 48, I think, and she really noticed changes in herself. She became incredibly anxious, really like unusual anxiety for her. She didn't feel like she recognised herself. She would wake up anxious. She went to her GP. Her GP said, I think you've got anxiety and possibly depression, and started her on an antidepressant medication. She took it. She didn't really feel much better. She went and saw somebody else who said, no, just try a different antidepressant medication. And then she saw someone else who was like, I think this is menopause, and let's talk about that. So then she came to HRT quite late, and as a result made it her mission, and she's got a public voice, to then go and tell everybody about menopause and HRT, and she's really kind of brought it to the forefront. It's very much a feminist issue. It affects all women, essentially, all women who reach the age of about, 45. And the reason it's a particularly feminist issue is because women tend to lose out on in the workplace, I would say, women miss out at two focuses on life. When they're in their maybe 20s or 30s, they're having children, so they take time out from their careers to like go and have children, and then they come back into their careers, and then when they are about 50, when our male equivalents are being promoted, that's when the menopause hits. And actually, a lot of women describe like being in the workplace and presenting or something and having a hot flush and having to leave the room because they're so embarrassed, and it really kind of starts to affect their ability to progress and to be their best selves. Obviously, it's got massive implications for your home life, for your marriage, for the way you interact with your children, and I've spoken about the media attention. Okay, so let's think about what it is. So, in order to understand menopause, we need to take a step back and understand about our eggs. So, at birth, I'm going to just come in this way so I can see the screen. At birth, we have the most eggs we're ever going to have in life. In fact, we have the most number of eggs when we're like 32 weeks fetuses. So as soon as you're born, our number of eggs are in the decline. And what happens when you hit about 12 or 13 and you start having your periods, each month, one of these very immature eggs gets fertilized and released, comes down the fallopian tube into the uterus, where it hopes optimistically to meet a sperm and become an embryo and then get implanted. As we get older, these reserves of our eggs deplete. And when people talk about, our fertility changes, like, when you're 35, your fertility falls off a cliff, it's not actually true. It's just that as we get older, our egg reserves are depleting and depleting and depleting until eventually they conk out. And the reason why it's good to understand this, because what's happening each month with one of these eggs becoming matured and then becoming released, this is under the guise of hormones. And when these eggs are no longer present to be matured and released, hormones, it affects our whole hormonal cycle, and our hormones start to decrease. And this is what's happening in menopause. So, is everyone familiar with this? No. This is GCSE biology. But you might not have seen it since you did GCSE biology. So, this is just basically what's happening it's a graph. This is what's happening in your ovary each month. One of these eggs becomes matured, gets released into the fallopian tube. You get something called a corpus luteal cyst, which takes over and will start making progesterone if a pregnancy occurs. If it doesn't, then it will just dissolve. This is what's happening to the lining of the womb. It's building up, building up, building up, building up, and then when there's no pregnancy, the lining of the womb sheds, and that's your period. This is all under the instruction of these hormones. These are our 4 sex hormones, FSH and LH, which are released by the brain, and estrogen and progesterone, which are made mainly in the ovaries. Estrogen in particular is made in the ovaries. And so when we run out of eggs, this system starts to just conk out till eventually it just no longer functions at all. So, when is the menopause? So, meno comes from the Greek monthly, pause from ending. So, it's when our monthly bleeds end. Now, we don't really know when our monthly bleeds end because we say you've gone through the menopause when it's been a year since your last period. But you don't know when your last period is until it's been a year since your last period. So you don't really know when you've actually gone through the menopause. The other thing is lots of women, and I'm sure there are some women in this room, will have like the merinocoilin or be on progesterone contraception or be on something that means that they are no longer having monthly bleeds. So again, the bleed is not really a very good indication. But say we were all living in a world where, you know, we weren't taking anything into our bodies and we weren't using contraception, that's when we would define the menopause. So, perimenopause, however, the most vaguest term of all, is when your symptoms start. And it's when these symptoms of falling estrogen start, that's when we would say you are in the perimenopause. And for some women, it could be 6 months before they finish their periods, for some it could be 5 years. So the perimenopause is quite a vague term, actually. And, you know, sometimes I see women who are like 38 or 39 and are like, think I must be in perimenopause. But it's quite unlikely. But from your early 40s, I would say it's quite possible you can start to get perimenopausal symptoms. Your menopause, so normal age is 45 to 55. Average age in the UK is 51. If you have a menopause in that you stop your periods altogether before the age of 45, we would say that's an early menopause. And if you stop your periods before the age of 40, that's called something called premature ovarian insufficiency, and that's actually that is a very early menopause, a premature menopause, and that's actually got quite different connotations to a normal menopause. And a surgical menopause, which is in some ways the most difficult one to manage, is when you have a hysterectomy. Actually, if you have a hysterectomy and you take away the ovaries at the same time, then you go into a very quick menopause and it's quite sudden. And women that experience that often have quite bad symptoms. But sometimes, even if you have a hysterectomy and you leave the ovaries behind, the ovaries have somehow noticed that there's no womb left anymore, and they tend to stop producing eggs and hormones. Is everyone with me so far? That is my background biology lesson. Okay, so this is just a really nice graph of what is happening with estrogen, and really estrogen is the hormone that we're focusing on. So from the age of 12, our estrogen levels are high, and I mean they change, it fluctuates a little bit throughout the month, but they are essentially you've got quite robust levels of estrogen. And if you were to take blood tests on women throughout their reproductive years, you would see their estrogen levels would be quite robust. When you start to go through the menopause, your estrogen levels start to fall, but they don't fall in a nice, smooth, way like this. They fall in this kind of haphazard fashion. So you're having these peaks and troughs, these ups and downs, and we think, no, it's not that well understood still, but we think that these peaks and troughs which are accountable for a lot of the symptoms. Because one of the most common questions people ask me is, well, will you not just be in the menopause forever? If your estrogen levels are falling, why would you ever feel better? And actually what's happening is this period where our estrogen levels are up and down and haphazard the whole time, which lasts for maybe 5, 7 years, different in different people. And then when you leave, when you've beyond it, you end up again with smoother estrogen levels, lower than you had during your reproductive years, but you're not having peaks and troughs, so you're not having hot flashes or night sweats or anxiety or brain fog in the same way. And this estrogen, like postmenopausally, is being made mainly in your fat tissues. So some women who are, so let's say, have more fat than others, often fare better during menopause, although it's not exclusively true. Okay, so if you want to think about what estrogen does in your body, I think the punchline is it makes everything plump, smooth and strong and moist. So that is like, if you think about it, it is that female, that is what it does. And we have estrogen receptors all over our body, affecting all of our tissues. So in the brain, it is, we have estrogen receptors which affect our sex drive, our memory, our mental health, our temperature control, big one. In our heart, estrogen actually reduces plaque formation. Plaques are what coat the inside of the arteries, which supply blood to the heart. And actually, estrogen is what we call cardioprotective, in that it protects our hearts, which is why women in their 50s are much less likely than, say, men in their 50s to have heart attacks, because we've still got some estrogen. But by the time we're in our 60s, our levels of heart attacks are very similar to men. Breast development and growth is an obvious one. Bones is a very big one, and one that often gets overlooked. We have two sets of cells in our bones, something called osteoblasts, which build up bone, and osteoclasts, which break down bone. And estrogen acts on our osteoblasts to build up bone, and it's a really, really important thing to understand, because increasingly we are recommending hormone replacement therapy for women who have osteopenia or osteoporosis, which means that they have much thinner bones than we would want them to have, and the estrogen actually is protective of their bones and is a treatment for osteoporosis or osteopenia, and something to prevent it. In our ovaries, I've spoken about, it makes our eggs mature, it maintains our menstrual cycle. In the uterus, the womb, it makes the lining of it thick, ready to get an implanted embryo. And this is the one that I think Fabiane will speak maybe more about. But what we know is that we've got it in our skin, our hair, and our joints. So it really helps lubricate and maintain moisture. And one of the menopause symptoms that often people don't think about is often women will present with a really itchy skin, or just feeling very itchy. And actually that is because of, that's because you're losing estrogen in the skin, as best as we can understand it, even though it's not a usual menopause sign, if you like. So what are the kind of classic symptoms? Changes to our period, spoken about. Hot flashes and night sweats. This was like, I would say 20 or 30 years ago, hot flashes and night sweats were the only symptom of menopause that anyone would ever talk about. You know, and women might have spoken about it with their good friends or with their sisters or something, but not like kind of communally. And I myself, I'm 46. I've not yet had a hot flash, although I'm interested to have one. There probably be someone in the room that can explain it better. But as I understand it, it is, and this is what I know to be true. It is a sensation of rising heat, usually like from the center, and it comes and it envelops the whole body. And it actually, if you take a woman's temperature while she is having a hot flash, it can go up 2 degrees. So your actual temperature goes properly up, then, and it lasts about 3 to 5 minutes, then it comes crashing down, so then you are actually freezing. So you go from being boiling hot, like wanting to strip off all your clothes, and you can imagine how appropriate that is in most settings, to then being freezing cold, and then wanting to put everything back on. And obviously this is really like, hot flashes and night sweats. The night sweats, people really describe they waking up drenched, so they wanted to take their clothes off, and sometimes they even have to change their sheets because the night sweats are so bad. Although other people have minor hot flashes. So it can be anywhere. Sleep can be related to night sweats, but actually sleep can be a totally independent problem. You might find that you've always been a great sleeper, managing your 8 or 9 hours a night, and then all of a sudden you can't get to sleep, you're waking up. Anxiety might play a part in why your sleep is disrupted, but it just seems that people often complain about less good quality sleep. Anxiousness is actually a big one. Anxiety is one of the ones that we kind of really recently are understanding more and more. The people that have never previously been anxious all of a sudden feel incredibly anxious about things that they know would not normally cause them anxiety, or people who have always been a bit anxious all of a sudden themselves with overwhelming anxiety, such that it almost can paralyze them, and that is a fact of estrogen loss. Brain fog, this I have started having, the loss of ability to think clearly. So with brain fog, people are like, I've always got brain fog, and it's like, I think, as I understand brain fog, it's like, you are trying to think of a word that you know so well, and you can think about everything to describe the word, but you cannot access that word. And it's almost like you're like going crazy in your own brain, like, how can I find this word? This is brain fog. And that is not normal, and it's not aging, and it's not early onset Alzheimer's, which people are often really worried about. And again, it passes. Mood I put low mood, but it actually tends to be labor mood. What people describe is that they can become very, very upset very quickly, or very, very angry very, very quickly, and then they can also then feel better very quickly. So it's your mood, it feels up and down. You don't feel quite as in control of it as you might have previously done. Headaches, women who suffer with migraines, this is something which not a lot of people know. Women who are migraine sufferers, who have been well maybe throughout their 30s and 40s, may notice that all of a sudden their migraines start to become bad again around the menopause. It's actually, we also see that migraines get worse around when you start your periods menarche, but particularly around menopause, because the fluctuations in estrogen triggers migraines. So people who have had a really good run of migraines all of a sudden start getting their migraines again, and these are often treating women with like new onset migraines, specifically with HRT. Hair and skin becomes dry and brittle. I mean, it's a really sexy, like, what a smorgasbord of symptoms. Okay, I'm putting this on because this is really, as much as, and because we're all women, as much as menopause is spoken about and all those other things are really spoken about, the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, GSM, is often, women are very late to come to their doctors with these issues, like to present with these issues. I work in community gynecology for the NHS, and I run the menopause clinic. And I will often women will come presenting with menopause symptoms, and then I will ask them about vaginal dryness or thing, and they will say yes, but they would never think to volunteer that. Like, you would never think that I've got vaginal dryness, so I've got itchiness in my vagina, which I haven't previously had. Women just tend to ignore that. So I put this in specifically so that we can understand what's happening with GSM. We used to call it atrophic vaginitis, you might have heard that term, you might not. And it affects the vulva, the vagina, the urethra, which the urine comes out of the bladder, and the pelvic floor. All of these like parts of our body are all estrogen dependent. They've all got estrogen receptors. And when we lose that, what tends to happen is it becomes dry. It becomes much less moist physically. You might experience pain during sex. You might experience itchiness. You might experience spotting. From a urine point of view, you might get frequency. You might get urgency. You might get prolapse. So about prolapse, women who have had like 3 or 4 babies, of which I suspect there are some people in this room that have, you know, you think, well, you're fine, your urine symptoms and everything are fine, and then you hit 50, and then all of a sudden it's not fine, even though your last baby might not have been born 10 years ago, like 10 years previously. And that is because the estrogen is helps keep your pelvic floor, the band of muscles at the base of your pelvis, strong. And when you lose that, everything then starts to become lax. And this is why you start having some of the symptoms of urgency and prolapse. Recurrent urinary infections, the first way to treat women who have recurrent urinary tract infections is to start them on vaginal estrogen. And when it can happen, so it can happen from quite early on, and it can last till quite late on. So really, if you have these symptoms of, even if you're an older lady, like I will start vaginal estrogen in women who are in their 70s or 80s if they're having these symptoms. And again, some women will have no other symptoms of menopause except that they find that the vagina's just become a bit dry, and that's a good, it's a good time to intervene at that point. So, how long does it last? Is everyone with me so far? Okay, good. Any questions or points of clarification? No, good. Okay, so we used to say, you'll be through 2 or 3 years and then you'll be fine. Now we think it's probably on average about 5 years, although 50% of women will still be experiencing symptoms for 7 years. So that's really quite a long period of time to be in this state of flux. And this is quite relevant, that 42% of women experience symptoms beyond the age of 60. Now the reason that's relevant is because when we talk about HRT, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, we know that the benefits outweigh the risks up until the age of 60, but from the age of 60, the risks may start to outweigh the benefits. And this is where it becomes a bit more complicated, and you've got to be it's a very kind of unique, on a case-by-case basis as to whether to treat or not. So, how do you diagnose it? It's based on symptoms and age. That's the most important thing, because often women will say, can I do a blood test to check if I'm menopausal or perimenopausal? If you are perimenopausal, as in your periods have not stopped naturally, the blood tests are going to be normal, almost certainly, but that doesn't mean that you will not be experiencing all those things. So the blood test is not very useful at diagnosing menopause unless you are worried about a very early menopause, like below the age of 40. That's the only time really that the blood tests are useful. And that's really what I was saying here, that really only if you've got a very early menopause, when worried about that, then we would do the blood test. And the reason we do that is because if you do have an early menopause, we would almost not just recommend, but strongly encourage you to take HRT to protect your bones. There is also a role in blood tests of if you've started HRT and we wanted to monitor your response, then there is a role in using them for that. But if you go to your GP and say, can I have a blood test to see if I'm in menopause? And they say no, or if they say yes and they do a blood test and say, you're not in menopause, it's nothing. You still might be in menopause, but the blood test just hasn't shown it. So really, if you're in the right age bracket and you've got the right symptoms, you probably are. Okay, managing symptoms. I'm not going to talk about the lifestyle ones. I'm going to leave that to Fabiane. There are some non-hormonal medications, antidepressants, fluoxetine and sertraline in particular, which can help with mood, can help with sleep, can help with hot flushes actually, and clonidine, which we don't use that often. There are these herbal preparations, black cohosh and red clover, yams. There are things like this that do have some benefit. And then there are vagina moisturizers. I don't know if you've ever heard of these, but these are the three I think are the best in the market. Replen's vagina moisturizer is a really good one. Yes, exclamation mark, and Silk with a Y. They're all quite good vagina moisturizers, and they also do lubrications. And then we're going to go on to HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. Any questions about menopause? Feeling like experts? Good. Okay, so the hormone we are replacing in hormone replacement therapy is estrogen. A really, really important to understand this, because some people will say to me, I'm on hormone replacement therapy and they're just taking progesterone, and that is a hormone, and you are taking it, but it is not what we consider to be HRT. It can come in tablets, patches, or gels. These are some patches. This is estrogen, which is what we often start people on. And it is safer to take estrogen through the skin, through the transdermal route. So that means like a gel or a patch is actually the safer way to take estrogen, because it's not being metabolized by the liver. So actually, there's no increased clotting risk, like having a clot in your leg or lung, if you take it through the skin. And women who have previously had a clot in their leg or lung are safe to use transdermal through the skin, HRT. It's safe. Tablets, however, are really good for women who don't absorb it well. 30 years ago, we were only prescribing in tablet form. Patches generally are changed twice a week, and gels are applied every day. Did I have a progesterone? Oh, yeah. So, why take HRT? Helps with the hot flashes and night sweats, protects your bones from thinning, gives you improved sleep, mood and muscle ache, improved vaginal dryness and sexual function, protects your heart, reduces cholesterol. Happy days. Why aren't we all on it? Whatever. I won't come on to that. I want to just talk about progesterone, because if you are taking estrogen into your body, then estrogen acts on the lining of the womb to make it thick. And if you just take it without progesterone, then you are at risk of endometrial cancer. So if you are starting HRT and you're given estrogen, if you have a womb, you have to take progesterone alongside it to keep the lining of the womb thin, so that you are not at risk of endometrial cancer. And that is the reason why we take progesterone. The most common, my favorite, is the Mirena coil, because it's a T-shaped device which is inside the womb and releases progesterone. I like it the best because once it's in, it lasts for 5 years, it acts as contraception, and it keeps the lining of the womb really thin, so very, very low risk of cancer. But increasingly we're using Utrogestan, which is a bioidentical progesterone that you take at night, which also keeps the lining of the womb thin. There are also some other progesterone tablets that you can take, and there are some patches which have both estrogen and progesterone in.
They say the Mirena coil lasts 8 years now. They say it lasts 8 years now.
So the Mirena coil lasts for 8 years as contraception, but for endometrial protection as HRT, it only lasts for 5 years. Okay, but yes, it does. For contraception purposes, it lasts for 8 years. So testosterone is the male hormone, and Increasingly, women are using it as an add-on to their HRT. It's currently off license in the UK, but that's going to change very soon, within the next year or two. About 25% of women find it really helpful. The things that it can help with particularly is libido. If you feel that all your symptoms have resolved, but you just have no desire for sex whatsoever, then testosterone can help with that. Energy, clarity of thought. Energy, like as in feeling like good energy, and clarity of thought and brain fog. Now, I think if you think about testosterone, you think about a man coming into like a business meeting all psyched up, or a man going to war. That's what testosterone basically does do to men. So we need a little bit of it to keep up with those sorts of things. But it only really helps in about 25% of women. And it's typically a gel that you rub into the top of your leg. And you do monitor that with blood
tests. Will it
tests.
increase hair growth? Will it increase facial hair growth?
So the risk of taking the dose of testosterone that we take as women as part of our HRT is like a 1/12 of what a man would be taking if he was taking testosterone replacement. So it's a very, very low dose of testosterone. But there is a potential side effect of what we call androgenization, masculinization. So the main ones that we worry about. So what is quite common is actually you get hair growth at the site of application. So you put it in the top of your thigh and you get little sprouts of hair at the top of your thigh. That's quite common, and that's acceptable to most people. If your testosterone levels are too high or overdoing it, you have a risk of facial hair, male pattern baldness, I know it sounds nice, it gets worse, voice thickening or deepening, and also clitoral enlargement, which is incredibly painful. Now, most women don't experience that with testosterone, but this is why we monitor it. And actually, if it is, if your levels are too high, we will encourage you to scale it back. Vaginal estrogen is very safe. That's the first thing. It's not HRT. You can actually now buy it over the counter. It gets absorbed locally, and it doesn't really go into the bloodstream. So even if you've had breast cancer and you've been advised not to take systemic HRT, you can, in most cases, not all cases, take vaginal estrogen. It helps with itchiness, dryness, prolapse, recurrent infections, and libido. It's really, really a good product. There's a few different products, but it's a really good thing to know about. And often we will use it alongside systemic HRT, so you'll be taking your patch and your progesterone tablet, and you'll also be using vaginal estrogen if you need it. The most common ones on the market that you might have heard of is Vagifem, which is a tablet, which you insert into the vagina on 2 nights of the week. Avestin, it's now estriol cream, and Blissa, which is a gel. These are the 3 main ones. And this is really so important for women who are suffering with these sorts of genitourinary symptoms. It's amazing, and it's very straightforward and easy to use and safe. Okay, so why are we all on it forever? That's the question. If HRT is so wonderful, which I've just said it is, why aren't we all on it forever? So the Million Women study was a look-back study on 1 million women. It was American, but over a lot of the world, between 1996 and 2000, and they found a very, very strong causal link between HRT and breast cancer. And what was published was that HRT causes breast cancer, which is why, 20 years ago, if you went to your GP and said, I'm having hot flashes and I'm not coping and I feel like this, they would have said, grin and bear it, is because, it's like you don't want HRT, it's going to give you breast cancer. Actually, in 2012, they re-evaluated the study, and a lot of the claims were not true, and they hadn't caveated for a lot of the causes. And what we know now about HRT and breast cancer is that HRT is a potential promoter of breast cancer, but not an initiator, which means that if you are not going to get breast cancer, taking extra estrogen in your body is not going to give you breast cancer. However, if you are at risk of breast cancer, then by taking extra estrogen in your body, it could cause the breast cancer to come sooner than it might have done. So it's quite a tricky thing to understand, but that is basically what we know about HRT and breast cancer. As Ashkenazi Jews, which I would say is probably a lot of the people in this room, we already have an increased risk of breast cancer just by virtue of who we are. I can talk about that later, why that is. It's quite interesting. And if you've got a very strong family history of breast cancer, you might be a little bit more cautious about using HRT. But it's not absolutely contraindicated, which means that you could still consider it, and you might need just a bit closer monitoring. So that's one of the things, that's the main thing. So this, from a breast cancer point of view, if you're under the age of 50, it seems to be not much extra risk. Beyond the age of 65, as we get older, our breast cancer risk increases anyway, and then it will continue to increase, and taking HRT does. The main risk of the breast cancer, but there's also a risk of blood clots and stroke. Stroke mainly in the older 65, and blood clots if you've got other things that might contribute to your risk of having a blood clot. What we've got at the moment is we've got many, many more HRT users than we've ever had before in the world. And so in 10 years' time, we're going to have a much better idea about the risks. So at this point, what we know about the risks is that actually, in the women aged 50 to 59 taking HRT for 5 years, per 1,000 women, there'll be 6 extra cases of breast cancer, 7 extra cases of blood clot, and 1 extra case of stroke, which is actually not, it's not so many if you look at it as a kind of an infogram. So, this is my last slide, or penultimate. So we know, risks are nowhere near as high as we previously thought, can be helpful for many women, safest way to take it is patches or gel through the skin, and ideally this 5 years is where we're currently at in recommendation. But remember, our grandmothers went through menopause without a dot of HRT probably, and it's a normal life event. This is important to know because 20% of women will have very little symptoms and sail through it and be like, what's all this fast women and complaining and that? Then there'll be 20% of women who are like drenched in night sweats, unable to cope, and we don't know why some people are affected more than others, although it does seem that women who have like a PMS in life tend to menopause a bit worse because they're a bit more hormone sensitive. So that's one of the reasons, but we don't know it like on a big scale. There's lots of things you can do to help. Also remember, it is a complex time emotionally because it's a sign of aging for yourself. It's as our parents will be getting older and we'll be looking after them. Our kids will be getting older and leaving the nest. So there's like, even if you've had all your kids and you're happy, the fact that you now no longer could have, even if you wanted to theoretically, can play with you psychologically. So it's a bit of a complex time emotionally. So that also kind of plays in particularly to a lot of the kind of symptoms that we have, like with the anxiety or the mood and things like this. It's complex. But what I would say is, don't suffer in silence, see your doctor and discuss. Does everyone feel like they're ready for the next one? I'll text you all later. Any burning science-y sort of questions? Yes.
You say see your doctor, but as we often know, some of them are better than others. Like that's also scary because you know if your GP is not well up on that and things like that. So, is there services in the NHS which you can access where you have people who are specialised in it?
Yeah. So all boroughs have a menopause clinic. So I guess most people have a Barnet people. I work for Harrogate, Islington. But in Barnet, there are a lot of your GPs nowadays it's become much more like in the GP exit exams, basically now menopause will almost certainly come up. Whereas when I was doing my exams, it never came up. So GPs who are kind of coming through the system now are much better educated. Don't really want to be like sexist, but I do think female GPs tend to be slightly more sympathetic than the male GPs, although that's not always true. But if you find that you're not getting where, or you're not happy with the consultation, if you say, can you just refer me to a menopause clinic, there might be a wait. I mean, there isn't a long wait in Harrogate. It's not so bad in Barnet, but there are, especially specialists. Yeah.
I was told 9 months, and it's going to be a full year since I asked for it. I had to beg for it from the doctor. I said Royal Free. There's one clinic a month for 50% of the people.
No, so that's in the Royal Free, but there's another one. I used to work in that menopause clinic in the Royal Free actually.
Why did they?
No, but there's another. Edgware General is also running a menopause clinic as far as But also, this is the other thing, that actually, if you become educated and if you go to your GP knowing what it is that you really want, then, I mean, this is part of my raison d'etre, like to kind of, you know, if you go in and say, I'm suffering with X, Y, and Z, and therefore I want to try X, Y, and Z, or I want you to at least consider giving me this, then you can have a much better discussion than if you go in not empowered, you say, I'm feeling like this, and they say, well, it's this, and then you don't feel that you've really, so this is why educating yourself is important.
Trying to go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think we're in the perfect menopause management situation in the UK. I would say that. No. I think a few head shakes would agree with that. Any other questions?
You were talking about hot flashes.
Yeah.
With me, it was like someone took a thermostat, she put it up 20 degrees instantly.
Yeah.
So basically, I was teaching a load of women. I ran down to, so excuse me, back in a minute. I ran down 2 floors, across in loads of freezing air, then I ran up 2 floors and just carried on teaching. Because I need to do it for 10 years. 10 years ago. Until I found the solution. I've just told her about the solution. The solution for me was sage leaf extract.
As well?
Sage leaf extract. You take it, it vanished.
Good. Good. If you find something that works, great.
Now there is Viosa, no?
Do you want to?
Viosa? Viosa.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, so this is, it's not a good one, NHS, yes, for the hot flushes. It's, what's its name? I'm actually going to teach them on this now, it's just not my name, this is a problem. But it's a medication, yeah, it adds some totally different stuff to the brain. It's good for flushes. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Fabiane now, and then afterwards, please, well, if there's any questions that haven't been answered, we will do that.
Hello, hi everyone. I see some familiar faces already. Well, sorry for the grim situation of, looks very overwhelming, and I get it. It looks, but we are not broken. We are here.